Regular verbs in Spanish. I'm going to introduce you to the concept of how to conjugate or use verbs in Spanish. The first thing you need to know is that Spanish is a verb-based language. English is not. English is more of a noun-based language. That's a deeper discussion than I feel like getting into in this presentation, but suffice it to say that in Spanish, verbs change with every person who is speaking. So we have 6 people: I, you informal, you formal, he, she, we, you all, they, and you formal. That sounds like more than 6 people, but some of those people are all jammed into one. Suffice it to say that for this presentation, I'm going to keep things simple. We're just going to have the I and thou dialogue, yo and usted, and I'm also going to show you nosotros, we, and ellos, they, so you can start to get a grasp of the pattern of verbs in Spanish, specifically regular verbs. Okay. There are 3 flavors of verbs in Spanish, 3 types. They're called AR verbs, like hablar. Do you see how there's an AR at the end of hablar? That means to talk. ER verbs, like comprender, to understand, have an ER at the end. And IR verbs, like vivir, to live, have an IR at the end. As you study verbs in Spanish, you want to look for patterns. There are lots of AR verbs. Most AR verbs are regular. That's good. So if you learn that pattern, let's say you learn the pattern for hablar, to speak, to talk. If you learn that pattern, you can use the same pattern with all AR verbs with complete ease. So learn that template and plug it in to every new AR verb you learn. ER and IR verbs are also pretty simple. I will tell you that most irregular verbs are also ER and IR verbs. The good news, however, is that ER and IR verbs are quite alike. So if you learn the pattern of how to use ER/IR verbs, you can use those on a lot of other verbs also with ease. So the message is, learn patterns. You can reuse them later. Let's start with hablar, to talk. Again, this is an abbreviated conjunction, but it's enough to get going. There are people missing here, but with I and you and we and they, that's enough to get going. So why don't you repeat after me? Yo hablo. Usted habla. Nosotros hablamos. Ellos hablan. Good job. So now you know how to say I speak, you speak, we speak, they speak. And you also know something of a pattern. Do you see how the first part of each one of these verbs is HABL or HABL? Habl. That's called the root of the verb, and the root of a regular verb is consistent. So the endings, if you will, the terminations are o, a, amos, an. If you can remember o, a, amos, an, you can conjugate any AR regular verb. Hablo, habla, hablamos, hablan. So what did we just learn? O, as, o, a, amos, an, right? Is that how it went? Let's look again. Yeah, that's right. O, a, amos, an. That's our template. Now let's try to rinse and repeat. Try to say I, you, we, they for all these regular AR verbs. Our template, remember, is o, a, amos, an. Those are the terminations. So look at caminar, and you'll see that if you take the AR part off, you're left with camin. So let's conjugate it. Camino, camina, caminamos, caminan. I walk, You walk, we walk, they walk. That worked pretty good. Let's look at conversar. What do you take off? That's right, take off the AR and you're left with converse, which is the root of the verb. Now we add our template, o a amosan. Let's go. Yo converso. Usted conversa. Nosotros conversamos. Ellos conversan. I converse, you converse, we converse, they converse. Done. Take a look at regalar. You're going to take off the AR. Leave the root, which is regal. You're going to say, yo regalo. I give as a gift. Do you know how you say, you give as a gift? That's right. Usted regala. What about we give as a gift? Absolutely. Nosotros regalamos. Good. And what about they give as a gift? Ellos regalan. Nice. Notice where I'm putting the emphasis. It's not regalan. It's not regalan. It's regalan. You're putting the emphasis on the second to last syllable. Regalan. Caminan. Conversan. Look at cocinar. Do the same thing. Look at trabajar and do the same thing. You have a process now. Why, if I even made up a verb that doesn't exist, like tatar, you'd know what to do. You'd take off the AR, you'd have tat as your root, and you'd say tato, tata, tatamos, tatan, which means nothing at all, but it's perfectly conjugated. Okay, look at comprender. Basically, there's the same pattern going on here. The only difference between hablar and comprender, or an AR and an ER regular verb, is that instead of the verb being a, or a in Spanish, it's e, or e in English. In other words, where it would have been usted habla, now it's usted comprende, with that e sound at the end. So let's conjugate this ER verb together. Yo comprendo. I understand. Usted comprende. You understand. Nosotros comprendemos. We understand. Ellos comprenden. They understand. Remember, the yo, the usted, the nosotros, and the ellos, those are the subject pronouns, are completely optional. You can just say comprendo and still mean I understand. Do you remember what the process was with the AR verb? What did we do? Step 1, we recognized where the root was. How did we determine the root of the verb? We took off the last two letters. In this case, that would be E and R. What are we left with? Comprende. That's the root, the unchangeable part of the verb. Now, the endings are going to be o, e, hemos, en. So no matter what ER regular verb we encounter, we're going to go through that same process. Take off the last two letters of the to form of the verb, the R form, the infinitive form. Discover the root, in this case comprend, and add on o, e, hemos, en. And then we'll have a verb. Try it out. What were our terminations again? O, e, what? Look again. O, e, hemos, en. Okay, now we can do it. Here's vender, which means to sell. What are you going to do? Take off the ER, find the root, which is vend, V-E-N-D. Then you're going to add the terminations, o, e, hemos en. Let's conjugate, and let's not use the subject pronouns this time. What does it sound like? That's right. Vendo, vende, vendemos, venden. Notice this is a short two-syllable verb. It's still emphasizing the second to last syllable, which in this case is the first syllable. Vendo, vende, vendemos, venden. I sell, you sell, we sell, they sell. Can you do the same for responder, to answer, barrer, to sweep, comer, to eat? How do you say, I eat? How do you say, you sweep? How do you say, they answer? You say, yo como, usted barre, ellos responden. As you study irregular verbs, be sure to mix them up a bit. Don't always conjugate in order from yo to ellos. Mix them up just the way they are, mixed up in real life. Now what about IR verbs like vivir, to live? Well, I promised before that IR and ER verbs are a lot alike, and so they are. The only place they're different is in nosotros, where you're going to have an E, or I in English sound, instead of the A. So let's go through this conjugation together. Repeat after me. Yo vivo. Usted vive. Nosotros vivimos. Ellos viven. Nice. Students always want to know how to pronounce that letter V, and it really is like a soft B. So you're not saying V. Never let your lips vibrate in Spanish. Say more like a B. Yo vivo. Nice. Okay. So, o, e, hemos en. The only difference between this and comer or comprender is that vivimos. So our pattern again, take off the IR, end up with the root, which is viv, as in viva Zapata. Add o, e, hemos en, and there you have it. Yo vivo, usted vive, nosotros vivimos, ellos viven. Irregularity exists. Most verbs that are odd sounding are ER and IR verbs, and I say odd sounding because that's really what it is. Irregularity wasn't invented to torture Spanish students. It just so happens that a lot of the verbs that have infinitives ending in ER and IR have little oddnesses in them. When a verb is odd or irregular, and none of the ones we've just studied are, the irregularity usually makes itself known in yo. So you'll have a verb like tener, which means to have, and the yo form is tengo, with a weird g sound in yo. So look for irregularity in yo. Very often, though not always, after the yo irregularity, the verb becomes regular. Other types of verbs will change stems on you. Remember that part when you cut off the ER, AR, or IR part of the infinitive? That part that wasn't supposed to change? Well, there are verbs out there, though we haven't looked at any of them here, whose stems do change. They're not irregular really, they just have a little odd sound in the stem when you conjugate them. But you'll look at those later. The point I'm making is, to learn Spanish you have to start somewhere. So learn regular patterns first. Really burn them into your memory. Make them second nature. Learn to understand that o is yo, in whatever verb it turns up. So remember, práctica hace el maestro. Practice makes perfect. Keep repeating these patterns. Look up new AR, ER, IR regular verbs and try these patterns with them, and before you know it, you'll be having conversations. See you in class!